I remember at one point telling Luke, like, I don't think I'm going to make it. Like, I feel like I'm getting ready to have this baby. And so then Luke, put his foot on the gas and we got there a little bit quicker. But we get there, we go in through the ER. I'm like, get there, and they're like getting me out of the ER as fast as possible.
Was he moving the slowest he's ever moved in his whole life?
It felt that way for sure. That is Luke's routine. Every morning he gets up and he goes in the kitchen and he makes coffee. Like, he makes coffee before he literally does anything else. That is what he does. And I just know that about him. And so
it was a big day. He needed his coffee,
From the moment that life-changing stick revealed its verdict, our journey began. Suddenly, we were entrusted with the monumental task of motherhood. But amidst the joy, fear of the unknown sets in. How do we navigate this uncharted territory? With countless voices ready to guide us, it's easy to feel lost. Hey, I'm Hillary. I'm the founder of Baby Settler. I'm also a registered nurse and mom of 4. I hope to be your trusted friend who helps guide you through the maze of early motherhood. I'm grounded in medical expertise with a sprinkle of crunchiness, and I'm here to debunk myths and unravel truths. With a dash of type A energy, I promise to leave no stone unturned. Joining me on this adventure is my non-medical older sister, a future mom herself. Together, we'll get into the heart of early motherhood, asking the tough questions and seeking honest answers. So grab a cup of coffee, steal a moment for yourself, and let's dive into the adventure of early momming together. Hi, I'm Hillary.
And hey, I'm Erica.
Welcome back to the Early Momming Podcast. Here you'll find supportive and candid conversations about the realities of motherhood. I'm Hillary, your host, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Baby Settler and a mom of 4.
And I'm Erica, Hillary's big sister, a future mom, and our listeners' type A non-medical ambassador each week.
Today, we're talking about my birth stories. So I am going to be sharing details, and Erica is going to be sure to ask all the questions.
I got to tell you, I feel like we're jumping in head first. Like, okay, you want to be a mom? Let's go birth stories. Like, you go big
but
or
I
go
feel
home.
like it's a good way for people to really get to know me, because gosh, when you hear somebody's birth story, I feel like it's a pretty intimate, like it's a progression in friendship, right? To share your birth stories.
Well, I agree.
I also put it out there on Instagram already.
Yeah, I was just about to say, spoiler alert, if you'd like to watch her delivery, you can do it on Instagram. We'll talk about that later because
at Baby Settler, you got to scroll back about 2 years and then you'll see the post.
That's really something. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. But before we jump into those details, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, will you go leave us a review and tell us what you like? Your reviews will make our podcast more findable for other moms to be able to join in on these candid conversations.
All right, deep breaths.
We're
really jumping in. We're about to become best friends.
I'm in the hot seat.
Okay, so we're going to start with the oldest, Boyd, who is your number one. He's the OG, the boy who made you a mama and made me an anti-E-Rock. Okay?
Boydy Boyd, baby Boyd.
Boydy Boyd. Yeah. Remind me of the details, like how old were you? How many years ago was this? Were you a nurse yet? Like, just start from the beginning and tell me a little bit about it.
Okay. And again, if you listen to episode number 1, I already gave the disclosure that I have a hard time with brevity. And so I am going to try to help us keep this podcast to 45 minutes. I wonder if we can do it. So I'm going to try to be super brief. But there's a lot of details here. So Boyd.
Don't count on it.
No, yeah. We might have to break this into 2 episodes. I don't know. All right. Boyd was almost 13 years ago. It was Luke and I, my husband, we got married. We actually got married when I was 21. I turned 21 in December and we got married in January. Luke is 2.5 years older than me. So we already went against the norm.
Luke and I graduated from high school together. So he was in my class in high school.
Yes, I went for the older man. Yes, you did. But we had been married for 3 years because Boyd was born in November and then I turned 24 in December. So we had been married for almost 3 years when we had Boyd. It was definitely an unexpected pregnancy. I mean, we were married, but we weren't expecting to get pregnant as quickly as we did.
So when you say unexpected, do you mean like oops?
I mean,
or do you mean like...
No, it wasn't an oops. I mean, we knew what we were doing, if that's the question.
Okay. Yeah, I would.
We know how babies are made. We knew how babies were made at that point.
Well, I know you know now.
And I was not on birth control.
4 children. Okay.
Yes.
So you knew the probability was there.
Yes, knew the probability was there, but was not expecting for it to happen as quickly as it did. I was not a nurse at the time, but I was still my type A self. And so I went into it thinking here that I was as prepared as possible because I had read all the books and I had done all the Googling and I had taken the hospital breastfeeding class and the hospital birth class that was offered. So I thought that I was prepared. I did not buy a bassinet because in my mind, my baby was going to sleep in his room from day one. As soon as we got home from the hospital, he was going to be sleeping in his room because that was the way that what you had to do to have a good sleeper. And sleep was 100% a priority for me. And
to be fair, you had the house that had like the Jack and Jill bathroom with the guest bedroom.
Our house was super small, like less than 1,200 square feet. It wasn't
not big
like
at all. You're like, the baby's sleeping upstairs in his room and we're going to stay downstairs.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
But I can't honestly say if we had a bigger house, if I probably would have had the same thought. So I'm not sure that it was necessarily the fact that it was small. I think I just thought because of the book that I read that this is what we had to do. I did not, it went against who I was, but I did not really ask why. I just followed advice blindly and it did not serve me well, but we'll talk about that later. I did not think that I needed a village. I was a very independent person. Like in general, I'm very independent. And I found that type of thinking and mentality carried over into pregnancy and birth prep and kind of what I went into labor and delivery expecting.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I remember this so clearly because, I'm a couple years older than you. We joked in our last conversation about how I was like, yeah, no, we're not going to be having babies at the same time together because you're like, I'm a child myself still, so I can't, get there yet. 25-year-old child. But from your big sister looking at you being prepped for delivery, I'm going to tell you, I thought, man, she's really got her act together. Like, she knows what she's doing. She's going to be a great mom. This is going to be so easy. I'm so excited. So, like, you are really putting some type A energy out there because I really believe that you also had it together because I think you thought you did.
I did. Yeah, I did. I definitely did think I did.
Yeah.
But that's good to know. I feel validated in my prep work there. But
no, you really were owning it. Like you put that out there. I was very confident in you.
Yes. Well, thank you. I think from here, maybe I should just talk about like how I went into labor. Would that be helpful? Just like what that birth story looked like?
Yeah. I think that, before you do that, I think that I want to say like, having the confidence that you're prepared. I think that as a type A person myself and a person that tries to think of everything before something happens, I think that I find myself in new scenarios where you can prepare for everything, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And so you can't prepare for something that you don't know. So I think that that's something really important. And part of the reason that I am so excited to have these conversations with you before I'm going down this path is because I want to know about the things that I don't know about so that I can be prepared. So like equipping myself with information. I'm scared to hear more about this delivery because I feel like I'm going to learn some things, but you go right ahead. Let's talk about how labor started.
Yeah. So I'll talk about before. So basically, we were actually at a friend of ours' house eating dinner. It was a Sunday evening. And Luke and I went over to a friend's house for dinner. And it was so weird. It was like 7 or 8 p.m. And I just remember that I was like 39. I was 39 and 5 weeks gestation. So not quite to my due date, but had uncomplicated pregnancy, no issues. I remember being at their house and my stomach started hurting, kind of like, I thought I had to go to the bathroom. Like maybe I had eaten something or I had a stomach bug. I just was in their bathroom a lot. And I remember wiping and there was like a little bit of blood tinge. And so this was probably around 8 p.m. So I came out of the bathroom and I told Luke, like, hey, I think we need to go home. Like, I am definitely cramping. I don't know what's going on. Like, maybe this is labor. We didn't obviously tell our friends, but we wrapped it up pretty quickly and got home. When we got home, I told Luke, like, you should go to bed, just in case this is the real thing. I'm just going to kind of hang out in the living room and just watch some TV and see what happens. So it's hard to remember the timing exactly, but I remember, did I call you that night? I can't remember.
So I was living in Charlotte, but I was traveling a lot for work. So it was a Sunday night, I remember, right?
Yeah, it was
I'm pretty
Sunday
sure
night.
it was a Sunday night. And you called me and you were like, I don't, like, you're confused. You're like, I think I might be going into labor, but I'm not sure. I sent Luke to bed. Just a heads up, because I wanted to get there. So like we had been communicating because I was like, I'm not going to get on a plane tomorrow if you go into labor.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
You need to like let me know. And so I think we chatted a little bit that night. But yeah, you were just like hanging out, trying to figure out what was going on because you weren't sure.
Yeah, it was not, because it was not your classic, like they tell you,
your
when
water
your contractions, right? Or your contractions are coming every 5 minutes. That's when you come into the hospital. So basically from 8 p.m. until like 4 a.m, my contractions were super irregular. Like I would have one contraction and then it would be over 15 minutes before I'd have the next one. And then I'd have a couple close together and then they'd be super far apart. And I was like, hey, there's no pattern here. This is not what the book said it was supposed to be like. This is not what the childbirth educator told me it was supposed to be like, but these hurt really bad. And my plan was always to get an epidural. Like that was my pain management plan, was epidural. I did not prepare in any other way for managing pain for this pregnancy because I knew I was getting an epidural. So fast forward to like 4 or 5 a.m, I'd already called the doctor at some point to say, hey, like this is happening. And they were like, when your contractions are every 5 minutes, like that's when we want you to come in. So I was like, okay. I think that was 11 o'clock. I called the OB office. Well, finally, sometime early in the morning, I woke Luke up and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to have to call and lie and say that they are coming every 5 minutes because I cannot take this anymore. Like, I need the epidural. We need to get to the hospital. I need to get this epidural. So Luke gets up, he gets a shower, he goes in the kitchen, he makes some coffee. Like,
was he moving the slowest he's ever moved in his whole life?
It felt that way for sure. That is Luke's routine. Every morning he gets up and he goes in the kitchen and he makes coffee. Like he makes coffee before he literally does anything else. That is what he does. And I just know that about him. And so it was a big day.
He needed his coffee,
He needed his coffee. So we left and we're driving to the hospital. And I remember at one point telling Luke, like, I don't think I'm going to make it. Like, I feel like I'm getting ready to have this baby. And so then Luke, put his foot on the gas and we got there a little bit quicker, but we get there, we go in through the ER. I'm like, get there. And they're like getting me out of the ER as fast as possible because anytime the ER sees a pregnant woman coming through the door, they're like, we do not want this lady delivering in this ER. Like we need to get her upstairs to labor and delivery as soon as possible. So I get to my labor and delivery room. It was like right around 6 a.m. So a little before change of shift. And I remember the nurses checking me. There was a nursing student with a nurse. And I remember the labor nurse checked me and she was like, wow, you're 7 to 8 centimeters. Your cervix is almost fully you're like, your cervix is really thin. I can feel your water bulging. Like you're actually really, you're probably in transition. And of course, I didn't really know exactly what that stuff meant. All I knew is that it meant that I was not going home and that I was actually in labor and this baby was coming soon. And so she said, okay, well, what's your plan for pain management? And I was like, I'm getting an epidural. And so she said, okay, well, we've got to get your labs drawn so we can check your platelets and make sure your platelets are okay. And we also have to get an IV started and get some fluids in you before we can do the epidural. So I'm like, hit me up. Let's do this. Fast forward an hour or so later, the anesthesiologist comes in and I am in legit transition. Like the contractions are every couple of minutes.
What does that mean? You keep saying transition.
Okay, so transition is when...
Dumb question, sorry.
No, it's not a dumb question. Transition is like between 7 to 10 centimeters when your cervix is like fully dilating and going away. So it is the most active phase of labor. Is that transition phase.
So you have to be 10 centimeters to push a baby out? Is that right?
Yes, correct. Okay. So transition is considered between 7 to 10 centimeters when your cervix is fully thinning out. Like, you're getting there.
You're about to start pushing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So you have to, if you're not planning on an epidural, transition is the time when you have to be really mentally strong and have coping mechanisms for handling your contraction pain. If you don't have any, if you don't have any, that's where you can feel really out of control, and it can feel like a really scary place to be if you don't have an epidural. Okay. So I did not have an epidural, and I did not have a plan for dealing with it because I had planned on the epidural. So the anesthesiologist comes in, he got mad. I remember him being frustrated with me because I couldn't sit still. I remember Luke talking about how it was like I was from The Exorcist or something. He was like, the sounds that were coming out of you when you were having contractions were like these crazy sounds. Like I remember getting an epidural. Like they tried to do an epidural 3 times and they finally had to call in a backup anesthesiologist to actually place the epidural because the original one could not get it. Now, it might have been me. I might have been a bad patient, but I will say that the second anesthesiologist that came in got it in with no problem on his first try. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't know if it was me or if it was him, but I think it was probably him.
Maybe it was the noises that Luke was talking about.
Maybe I scared him. I don't know.
Maybe you were scared. Can you remember those noises? Can we hear one?
No. No, I will not.
I'll get Luke to tell me one day, and then I'll come back and make the noise for everybody. I'm going to write that down so I remember that.
So once I got my epidural, things progressed really fast and I was comfortable. So I was fully numb, and he was born. So I got to the hospital around 6:30, probably got my epidural around 7:30. It was change of shift was going on. The new nurses were coming on. And then at one point I felt kind of like a pop, and it was my water had broken. So it broke on its own, spontaneous rupture of membrane, also known as SROM. Keep that in mind for later conversations. Okay. And then he was born at 9:20 a.m. So less than 3 hours, within 3 hours of me arriving to the hospital, he was born. Very little pushing, did not push for hardly any amount of time. I remember my water broke, and he was born within like 20 minutes of my water breaking. Now, do you want me to pause? Do you have some thoughts or questions?
No, I was just trying to think back because I feel like I remember getting the updates from Mom. And because I had, at this point, decided that I was not going to get on an airplane, I was going to get in the car and drive to Charleston from Charlotte. And I remember Mom giving me the updates along the way. And she's like, okay, we left, or, whatever update. I don't know if they were there or not, but like Hillary's like, she's going to do it. She's going to start pushing. And then literally 1 second later, they're like, the baby's here. And I'm like, what? That happened so fast. So is that normal? That you just like push a baby
that's a
out
normal
like that?
Part of my story with all 4 of my babies. That has been a normal part. I would say that most women, when they have spontaneous rupture of membrane, that delivery happens like within an hour or 2. But I wouldn't say, I think it's been my normal. Everyone's different. For me, that is very normal. And when I tell you the other birth stories, you will see that that's a recurring theme.
What makes that what makes that different for different people? Is it just how their bodies are built? Is it how like their chemistry in their bodies? Like what?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that question. I think has to do with positioning, how the baby is positioned, how low they are, your anatomy, the size of the baby, your ability to relax and just when your water breaks, if you're super tense and your pelvic floor is super tense, it's going to have a hard time allowing the baby to kind of move down and move out. If you have an epidural, you're relaxed, like you're not necessarily going to feel it. But if you're doing an unmedicated birth and you're not really able to relax and you're very tense, then it's going to be hard for your body to like really relax to be able to push the baby
along.
Yeah. But I don't actually know. I don't know if there is an evidence-based answer to that question. I don't know.
I think we should start a list.
Yeah.
Of questions. I'm going to start it.
So
right now.
Some other things that I wanted to point out about that is that we had, and this kind of like is just an insight into what happened postpartum, which we'll get there in a second. But all of our family, you didn't live in Charleston, but most of our family lived in Charleston. And so Boyd was the first grandbaby on both sides. Luke comes from, he has two siblings. They hadn't had kids yet. My siblings were there. We had a lot of people in our hospital room before delivery. And then immediately after delivery, everyone was at the hospital. Everyone was in the postpartum room. It was like a revolving door of people in our room right before delivery, right after delivery, and basically the whole time we were at the hospital. So I think that
seems very stressful.
Yes, it was. In hindsight, I didn't realize that had added a lot of stress that had happened. But now knowing what I know now, I know that was a huge piece of it. I ended up with an episiotomy due to fetal distress. So again, I didn't know this at the time, but I actually requested my medical records after I became a labor and delivery nurse because I wanted to know exactly what had happened at delivery with my first baby because it was such a hard postpartum experience. And according to the record, my baby was in distress and the OBGYN did an episiotomy. I had a significant postpartum bleed after delivery. Like they almost had to take me back to the OR to figure out where the bleeding was coming from. It took a very long time for them to do their vaginal repair. I had a certain tear that kind of went up inside the vaginal wall. When Boyd was born, he was placed skin to skin, but then because the OB was trying to figure out where this bleeding was coming from, they actually ended up taking him from me, taking him to the nursery, giving him a bath. And I did not even get to like breastfeed him until a couple hours after birth, which I can say pretty confidently would not happen today in the hospital because there are a lot of policies and practices in place that protect moms from that. Like there was absolutely no reason for him to be taken from me.
They just made the decision for you.
They just, yeah. And because because the OB was still there, they were doing my prepare. They just thought, oh, I'm going to take him and kind of check these things off my list. And I didn't know to advocate. Like I wasn't a lactation consultant. I didn't know that could really affect things. But in hindsight, it definitely negatively impacted my breastfeeding journey and my milk supply. I had a lot of postpartum pain from that tear. I had headaches. My back was hurting a lot because of the epidural situation. There were just a lot of things that I didn't really realize were trauma at the time, but I really did kind of have a traumatic birth. And then having all of the people around that were so interested in the baby right after birth, like everyone wanted to see the baby. And I just felt like I was having to deal with all this stuff and I wasn't able to like connect with my baby as much because I wasn't holding him as much because he was getting passed around. And I had an experience where the lactation consultant came in and we had family in the room. I think Luke's dad was in the room and she walks in with two nursing students, one of which is a male nursing student. Again, I'm 23 years old. This is my first baby. Modesty for sure goes out the window, like when you're having a baby. But when you're a young first-time mom, like you're still hanging on to some of that modesty. And I was a super modest person in general, like super modest.
You were?
Yeah. Are you is that a joke?
Yeah, that's a joke.
Yeah, that's a joke. And so she walks in with these nursing students, one of which is a male, and like basically walks over to me and like unbuttons my gown and like I'm fully exposed here. And I'm like, it was just there were so many things.
Dad in the room?
Yes. And so I just wanted her out of my room as fast as possible. Like it was just, there were lots of things like that in hindsight, I was like, man, that was like a lot. That was a lot for that postpartum experience.
So do you think, looking back now, I know policies have changed. Do you think that that is an experience that somebody might still have today? Or do you think that things have progressed from a policy and procedure standpoint that maybe that doesn't happen as often now?
I think it depends on where you're delivering. I think if you're delivering in a rural hospital, it could definitely happen again. I think
so
if you're
those
delivering
might be things that you need to maybe discuss, and even with your partner that's there with you, like, hey, make them aware that these are the things that we want. And if you are not able to advocate, make sure that they can advocate for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like having a birth plan is super helpful. We actually have a free birth plan at Baby Settler. If you want to go to our Instagram account, you can see a link in our bio that we've got like a free downloadable birth plan you can download. I also talk about this a lot in my book, Babies Made Simple, just things that you can do during birth to really prep and set yourself up for success postpartum. But I do think being an assertive and just knowing these things is really, really important. And if you can't do it, having your partner be the one that is your best advocate, that is confident, is assertive, is really willing to be your voice in those early weeks postpartum is definitely important for sure.
Yeah.
I think another couple things, just when I think about that birth experience and how it kind of impacted me in those first couple months, is that I did way too much postpartum early. Like I remember that you and me and Mom were out walking around the mall and like going out to lunch 3 days postpartum. I think you were there. Were you there? Maybe it was just Mom.
So you mentioned this in some notes that we had gone back and forth, and I thought that is so rude that I was not there, because I do not remember this.
Oh, maybe you weren't there. Maybe it was just me and Mom.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Maybe I was there. I just don't remember it. What was it, at like Town Center or something?
I don't remember. I just remember. And honestly, like Mom was probably doing it because I probably said I wanted to get out of the house. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I know that she didn't like force me to do it, but I remember being out at lunch and this older lady making kind of a judgment at me, like that I had a baby this young out of the house this early. Like I remember that. Ooh. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was definitely a judgy comment.
Yikes.
Yeah. And I should have seen a therapist, and I probably should have started medications for postpartum depression. Like I didn't ever think I would have another baby. I really didn't. But
was that because of the physical pain, or was that because emotionally you felt drained and the lack of sleep maybe? And
it wasn't the physical. It was not the physical pain, because I got over that. I mean, that definitely took a couple weeks for me to get over, but it was more of, I think the physical pain contributed to the mental load and just being mentally exhausted. I was physically and mentally exhausted, really, is the truth. And I wasn't getting sleep. My baby wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing according to the books. I felt like a terrible mom because I couldn't make breastfeeding work. The lactation consultant I had seen briefly in the hospital with her male nursing student in front of my father-in-law I'd call her and ask for help, and she would say, you know what, if you want to be successful with breastfeeding, you're just going to have to be like an open buffet. Every time that baby cries, you need to put him to the breast. And that was not me. Like I could not do that. And that is a segue into why Baby Settler was born, because I knew that there had to be another way, and I made it my life mission to find the other way.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll share some insight and some memories from Boyd's birth story or really the postpartum story that I think is funny looking back now. It's kind of funny. It wasn't really funny at the time, but how soon after Boyd was born did you decide that you wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse?
Probably in that first year. Like it was towards the end of the first year. Although I remember kind of being sad when I got discharged home from the hospital, because I just loved being around labor and delivery and new babies. Like that atmosphere felt really special to me. And so I remember kind of being sad going home and like, oh man, like I'm going to miss this. It was such a special, even though it was traumatic, like looking back, it actually was a traumatic birth. It still was such a life changing experience that the seed was probably planted there. And then it was when I kind of came out of that cloud towards the end of his first year that I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to school for this. Like, this is what I want to do. And that's when I really made that shift.
And that's when they told you can't be a labor and delivery nurse until you have a lot of experience. And you're like, hold my beer. I got this.
Yeah.
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 You would never say that, but yes.
Yeah.
You get it.
Yeah.
Well, I think back on Boyd's birth story, and we talked a little bit about where I was and how like I canceled a work trip and like I'm, on my way to Charleston and the baby was born. It seemed like I was like the last one to the hospital after the baby was born, and everybody had already met him and seen him and moved on. So I think that the funny, not funny at the time thing, but sort of funny looking back now is we had always had the plan that I would come help you after Boyd was born. But about, I don't know, maybe a couple days before, sometime that weekend before Boyd was born, you called me and said, hey, listen, we talked about it and we really just want it to be me and Luke for, a day or two. Like, I'll call you when we're ready for you to come to the house. So like, we just want it to be us. We want to have some time alone as a family. And I'm like, that's fine. You go, girl. Like, you let me know I'm here whenever you need me. Y'all were home for less than an hour. And I get a phone call from Luke. And he says, what are you doing? Where are you? And I was like, I am, I don't know, at lunch or shopping or whatever. What's going on? Your sister needs you here right now. And I was like, is everything okay? Yeah. I don't know what to do. She's freaking out. Like the baby's clothes don't fit. She doesn't have a bassinet. There's all these things that we need. We don't have them. You need to get over here right now. And I said, okay. So I kind of laughed in the moment. I didn't laugh at you because I knew that like it was pretty severe if that was the phone call that I was getting. But I think I texted you or texted Luke and y'all gave me a list of things that we needed. And I got my rear end in the car and I rounded up the Calvary and I came over and I stayed at your house for, I think, 2 or 3 nights, probably 2 nights. But I remember that first night I was there, I stayed up awake with your newborn child so that you could sleep. Because I think that you were home the first night and didn't sleep. And then that second night I was there and I held that boy for the entire second night with the exception of you coming out to feed him. And it's true. He would not lay down. Like he demanded
because he was starving.
Held.
He was starving is the truth.
Well,
it's like in hindsight.
He was good for E-Rock,
Yeah. But he was starving. Like I had a postpartum hemorrhage. My milk did not come in. He had lost more than 10% of his birth weight. Like all the things that I clinically can look back and say, I was given really bad advice. Like I was not given good advice. It was not evidence-based advice. Like, but I didn't know. But he lost way too much of his birth weight. He was already small. He was 6'6" at birth. So he was like under 6 pounds. He needed preemie clothes. Like his clothes wouldn't fit him. His swaddles wouldn't fit him.
I bought the best of the best preemie clothes.
Yes, you did. Kissy Kissy was the brand. Yep, it was a good brand.
Only the best for baby Boyd.
Yes. My other newborns did not sleep in Kissy Kissy outfits. But I was given really bad advice and it escalated. But yeah, I do remember that. That was rough. That was rough.
Well, we made it through.
Scared. And I was scared for him. We didn't have a bassinet, I think, that night that you were there or something. I did not want him sleeping.
I went and got one the next day.
Yes.
Because you were scared that he was gonna, like, all of a sudden the baby was here and you were like, I need him next to me so that I can like put my hand on him to make sure he's breathing.
Right. Yes. And so
Which
I did not, I could not go to
for that
sleep.
feeling.
No.
Yes.
And I did not go to sleep because the first night home, because I did not want him, I wanted somebody to watch him all night long.
Mm-hmm. And I did.
If he was not sleeping next to me. And you did. You did. Thank you.
What a great big sister and auntie.
You are. You are.
All right. So we got you obviously were a great mom to Boyd. We figured it out very quickly. We got all the very expensive premature clothes. We got the bassinet. We fed him. We figured it out. And so and then you became a nurse, or you went to nursing school. And then you got over I don't want another baby. I can't go through that again. And we got sweet Benjamin.
Yes. So Benjamin,
my sweet boy,
is almost 9.
How many years apart was that?
4. They're exactly 4 years apart. Boyd's birthday is on November 11th and Ben is on November 19th. So they're 4 years apart.
They clean me out every year.
Yeah.
That birthday card with the money.
Yeah. Back to back. So I had been a labor and I found out I was pregnant with Ben when I was getting ready to graduate nursing school. So graduated nursing school in May of 2015. Yeah, May of 2015. And got a job in labor and delivery. I definitely had some networking connections. I had some connections.
Told you I could do it.
Yep. And y'all, I found out I had already been offered the job. I had met with the women's service line director. I had been offered the job, and then I found out I was pregnant. And I really struggled with, do I tell them or do I not tell them? I know legally they can't do anything about it, but I was like, what do I do? So, because here I am, a new grad nurse. They're going to probably spend 4 to 6 months orienting me. And then I'm going to come off orientation and then I'm going to be out for maternity leave. So I really sat with it and I decided I was going to tell them because I felt like, you know what? If they're not on board with this, then this is probably not the place that I want to work. So I went to the women's services director after I had been formally offered the job. And she was like, you know what? If we did not hire you because of that, what kind of place would we be? And so she was amazing. Sadly, she was let go within 6 months of my hire.
Oh no.
I don't think that had anything to do with me, but she was an incredible leader and that was really sad. But anyway, I was labor and delivery nurse, started there in June and then delivered Ben in November. So what is that? Is that even 6 months? No, it is 6 months. It was 6 months. Mm-hmm. But I think things to point out for Ben was I knew a lot more because I was literally a labor and delivery nurse.
And you were doing that every day, helping moms
and
deliver
I
baby.
had done all the research.
You were clinically trained.
I was clinically trained. I decided that I did not want an epidural because of...
Why?
Because of the trauma.
Experience?
Yes, because of the bad experience that I had with my last epidural. In my mind, my memory in my mind was that this epidural was so terrible that having a baby without an epidural has to be better. That's just the perception that I had.
You made it so far down the road.
Yeah, and that was the other thing too. It was I was basically almost there last time anyway. So I was prepared this time with coping mechanisms. So deep breathing, hypnobirthing. I knew all the things. I had seen other women do it, that I was their nurse for them. And honestly, I also just wanted to go through the experience because I felt like I could relate to other moms and help other moms as a labor and delivery nurse if I actually knew what it was like to have an unmedicated birth. So that was my why behind it. And
I thought you were crazy.
You did. Yep. And everyone said, even my labor nurse friends, they're like, you're crazy, Hillary. You're not going to do it. Everyone said, you're not going to do it. You're not going to be able to do it. You're crazy. You shouldn't do it. Why are you doing this? Which honestly,
fuels your fire.
Yeah, it fuels my fire, but I also think it could have the opposite impact on other moms that are wanting to do that, is make them lose confidence. I guess I can't really do this if everyone is saying I can't do it. But don't let them into your head. Just block it out.
You can do it. Your body is built for it.
Yeah. And really, if you're fearful of the birthing process, it is going to be harder to do it. What I kept telling myself is like, my body is made to do this. My body is made to do this. And I mean, it wasn't quite that simple, but that's where I started. So no epidural. It was my first unmedicated birth. I remember I was at home cooking dinner, and I don't remember exactly. Oh, I had seen my OB earlier that day, and she had done what's called a membrane sweep, which is basically it's a vaginal exam where they take their finger and they kind of separate the membrane from the uterus. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's something you can Google if you want to. Membrane sweep. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not painful. But if your cervix, if your body is kind of ready for labor, it's one of those things that might actually send you into labor if your body is already like on the verge of it. So it worked. I had that done, went home, cooked dinner. And then it felt like period cramps. And we called my mother-in-law and we were like, hey, I think my mom was out of town with my grandma on a trip. They were like in Florida or something. So my mom wasn't even in town. So we called Luke's mom, who met us halfway to take Boyd with her. And then Luke and I like walked into Starbucks to like get a coffee. Like I wasn't really in active labor, but at this point I was a labor nurse. I was going to the hospital with my friends. Like I was, I knew things were happening, but I wasn't rushed to get there. I wanted to wait till shift change. So we got to the hospital at around 8-ish. And once we got there, my OB came and she broke my water because my cervix was dilated. I don't remember how much I was dilated, somewhere between 5 and 6 centimeters, but she broke my water. And then he was born within like 15 minutes of my water breaking.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was super fast. Yeah, super fast. So I did a lot of stuff on the birthing ball. He was born around 11:30-ish at night. So we got to the hospital around 8, born around, so like 3.5 hours later.
So like 3 hours, just like Boyd.
Yeah,
just like
super
3
fast.
hours of labor.
Yeah, active labor, super fast. And then he was born.
All right.
Yeah, and really, I think from that birth, there really wasn't anything traumatic about the actual birth process or even the postpartum hospital stay. Like everything was pretty.
When you were in the unmedicated delivery, no epidural, was there any point where you were like, oh my God, I should have gotten epidural?
No, there wasn't.
Really?
Nope. Because in my mind, like it was not an option. Like it wasn't even at the hospital. I remember my labor nurse friends telling me like, oh, Dr. So-and-so was around the desk just waiting for you to call out for that epidural. And we kept telling them to go away, that she's not going to do it. But I'm so glad he did not walk in my room, because I think if I had seen him, I would have been like, oh, actually it is an option. But
while
thankfully
you're here,
thankfully.
Just give me some of that good stuff.
It's interesting. You'll ask people that do unmedicated births, like, is it more difficult to have contractions or actually do the pushing stage? I would say the majority of women will say that once they get fully dilated and they are in the pushing stage, that it feels better. It's not as painful. It feels good. Like it feels better. For me, with all 4, well, I'd say my last baby was different, which we will talk about him in a second. But for my second and third unmedicated birth, I did not feel like the contractions were that hard to manage. They really felt manageable. For me, it's always been the pushing stage. And I'm so grateful and thankful that my pushing stage has never been long, because I think if I'd had longer pushing stages, which an average like pushing stage is an hour or 2 for most people. Mine have never been more than 15 or 20 minutes ever. So if I had a longer pushing stage with any of my babies, and that is the more difficult part to me, then I don't know that I would have gone on to have multiple unmedicated births, if that kind of makes sense. That's just like my perspective.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But some things that I learned from this birth was that even though I was very well prepared for birth and like that immediate postpartum period, I still really struggled postpartum. And that was a surprise. Like I did not sleep. I don't know if you remember this, Erica, but I literally could not shut my brain off, and I did not sleep for like at least 4 days. It might have been more than that. But after Ben was born, it didn't matter what I did. I could not fall asleep. Like it wasn't him. He was asleep, but I could not sleep. It was almost like that surge of hormones or the adrenaline that kicks in was just too, I don't know. I was on this high that I just couldn't really get off of. And it was really scary. I remember sitting in bed at home, like when we were home, and just crying to Luke because I had the worst headache ever. Like I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if I have an aneurysm in my head. Like, am I about to bleed out from an aneurysm because my head hurt so bad? But it was because I could not go to sleep. And that was...
Well, and then when you're sleep deprived like that, you start thinking about crazy things too. Like your mind goes into bad places.
I did too much too soon. We had breastfeeding difficulties, which again, didn't know it, but it was tongue ties, which we'll talk about on another episode here. But all 4 of my kids have had tongue ties. Missed with Boyd, missed with Ben, but that was a huge part of our breastfeeding difficulties. And with Ben, I was fixated on getting him on a schedule from day 1 because of the trauma of not having good sleep with Boyd early on. But again, I was kind of following this book that I didn't know the why behind the recommendations about what the book was telling me to do. And I was just blindly following advice. And I didn't realize how insane that was until he was almost 3 months old. And looking back, like that was
Was it working at all?
Because no, it wasn't working because I was missing the feeding component of it. Like in the first 6 months of life, feeding and sleep go hand in hand. So like you cannot address sleep and schedules and routine unless you first are looking at feeding. Like you need to make sure your baby is getting really efficient, effective, quality, full feedings, whether they're breastfeeding or bottle feeding. If you don't have that piece to the puzzle, then sleep will not improve no matter what you do. And I just didn't know that, because that you don't get that information as a nurse. That's like a whole nother, I had to go on a deep dive to find that information and become a lactation consultant and do a lot more research to really get that piece. I didn't know that at the time.
So did you find that out when Ben was a baby, or do you think that
that's where it started? I think that's like where the research started, and like the questioning and be like, well, this person is saying this or this book says this, but I think this is not right. And then finding the research to back it up, reading stuff, like digging deeper, and then using deductive reasoning to come up with things, looking at feeding quality, and just that's where it all started for me, was when Ben was like 3 months old.
Well, let's move to Ruth.
Okay, Ruth. So
my soul sister, my little Taylor Swift fan.
So she will be 6 years old when this episode comes out. She is 5 now, but she is the only girl in our family. I've got 3 boys and then Ruth. I was still working as a labor and delivery nurse when she was born at the same hospital. So I had my friends, same OB. I remember with Ruth, first of all, I will say when I found out Ruth was a girl, I was actually disappointed, which I'm saying that because I feel like that is something that is kind of taboo. Like a lot of moms might not talk about gender disappointment and being like disappointed in the gender. And I'm here to tell you that I absolutely love Ruth and cannot imagine life without her. But I was disappointed when I found out she was a girl, which is so weird because you would think,
because you liked the boys.
Because I already knew how to do boys. I was a boy mom. Like I already knew boys. I'd already done this with boys before. Like in my mind, I just thought that I was going to be a boy mom. And so it just seemed, I think I was maybe not necessarily disappointed. If I really go deep, it was probably more of fear. Like fear of how am I going to be a girl mom? And like, I don't know anything about girls. I'm sure it was fear based.
How does she fit in?
Yeah. But, uncomplicated pregnancy, until like 38 weeks, because I was a labor nurse, I was obviously highly sensitive to fetal movement and just sometimes the more you know, in that, you higher anxiety level definitely was so for me. And I felt like she wasn't moving as much as she normally did. And so I went in and did what's called a fetal non-stress test, where they put you on the monitor and just watch to see if you're contracting, and then also just to see what your baby's heart rate is doing over a period of time. And she was not moving a lot, and her heart rate was kind of minimal variability. So there's different variabilities in heart rate. So you have like absent, which is not good at all. That's like emergency. Then you have minimal variability, which can happen when babies are sleeping in utero. You have moderate variability, and then there's also marked variability, which is also not good. So minimal and moderate is normal, but you want babies to go in and out of min and moderate. Like they should be having what's called accelerations, where we see their heart rate accelerating so that we know that they're overall doing well. On the fetal non-stress test, she was minimal variability and not really there really wasn't any moderate variability. So my OB was like, let's do an ultrasound just to check on her and make sure things are going well. It's called a BPP, a biophysical profile. And it basically calculates like overall fetal well-being in utero. So she didn't do very well on that. So basically my OB was like, I really think the best thing to do today is get you delivered so that we are better safe than sorry. And I was not ready for delivery that day. But I also agreed with my OB and was like, definitely. I wanted to have another unmedicated delivery. So I was really worried that I was going to have to get Pitocin, which is a synthetic form of oxytocin that they use to induce for labor. And so in my mind, I was like, well, gosh, I'm going to have to go get Pitocin. And now I'm not going to be able to do it without an epidural because it's going to be too intense. And long story longer, not really. Long story long. I got to the hospital and my body, like, it was crazy. My body just started contracting. Like, I literally got to the hospital and got put on the monitor, and my friend was like, Hillary, you're like having contractions, regular contractions. So they joked. They were like, you were like speed walking around the unit for like 2 hours. I was like speed walking circles around the unit. We did not start Pitocin. My OB rounded a couple hours later and she was like, oh, y'all didn't start Pitocin yet. And my friend was like, no, she was contracting. And so the OB looked at the strip and she was like, yeah, you were contracting. Let me check your cervix. So she checked my cervix and I was like 5 to 6 centimeters dilated. So my cervix had changed since she had checked it earlier that day. And she said, well, let's go ahead and break your water and see if that will kind of throw you into labor. So I agreed to that. I'd done that with Ben, obviously, with my last unmedicated birth. And Ruth, I will say this is the one baby that did not come right after my water broke. And that was because my body wasn't truly in labor yet. So I was contracting, but I wasn't like in active labor. So Ruth was born about 2 hours after my water broke. So still not being in labor to having some contractions to having a baby within 2 hours of water breaking was still pretty fast for somebody who was kind of induced for medical reasons. So she was born at 38 and 2 weeks. And she really didn't have any complications. She was Rh negative, which is a blood type. And basically I'm O positive, she's O negative. So basically what that meant for us was that we just struggled with jaundice for a couple weeks. And then she had jaundice is elevated bilirubin. It makes babies super sleepy with feeding. It can have some other implications if it's gone untreated. But she also had a tongue tie. But I knew it this time. I knew about tongue ties and I knew it. So she had hers released in the first 2 weeks of life. And that helped our breastfeeding journey significantly. But there were some complications, but it was not, I was much more prepared for the postpartum. So I think some things that really stood out from her birth and postpartum was that 6 pounds, 11 ounces feels exactly the same as 7 pounds, 15 ounces coming out. So 8 pounds versus 6.5 pounds feels the same.
It's all the
same. That's actually surprised me. For some reason, I don't know why it surprised me. But yeah, felt the same. She had little blisters on her hands that really freaked me out. So babies can actually get what's called suck blisters, like in utero, if they're sucking on their hands and fingers. I didn't know that. And I was convinced that she had some kind of virus or something, some terrible virus. Again, knowing too much sometimes is not a good thing. She did not look like the boys at all. She came out with super dark hair.
She does not look anything like her as a baby.
No,
now.
She was, Ruth, if you're hearing this when you're a teenager or an adult.
Don't say it.
You are the absolute cutest thing ever right now. But when you were a baby, you were just not that cute. Is that terrible?
Brand new babies, fresh, are not the cutest.
No, I agree. Now, when you are postpartum with your brand new babies, you absolutely think they are the cutest. Because I did think she was the cutest. Looking back at pictures, I'm like, wow, she does not look like that anymore at all.
No, she's beautiful, but she was, dark, crazy. Wild head of hair.
Yeah.
Was she's like a little bit orange from the jaundice.
Yes, for a long time. Like she was jaundice for like 4 to 5 weeks. Yeah, like yellow. But at first you're like, oh, she's tan. Like she's real tan. And you're looking at my other kids, you're like, they're super fair. Like, but she did not look like the other kids, the boys.
Yeah.
Way better postpartum experience this time because I had more realistic expectations and I verbalized more of what I needed. And Luke and I had a lot of conversation. Luke and I had a lot of conversations ahead of time on like what it was going to look like and what kind of support we needed to have in place. However,
because you also had 2 kids.
Yes, we had 2.
Plus
so I had like a mother's helper who came for a couple hours in the morning that would hang out with the older 2 while I, watched Ruth, took care of Ruth. And then we'd put the older 2 down for naps. And then I'd have that time for Ruth. So just like strategic things like that. We had a housekeeper that came once a week because I need my house clean because I'm highly influenced by the environment that I'm in. And if my house is not clean, then I'm cleaning it, even if I'm exhausted. So like there were little things like that we budgeted for. I will say, again, this is sometimes out of your control. Like you can't really control when you get pregnant or when your baby comes, but I did have her over summer break. So Boyd was home from school and that was really hard. Like you would think, oh, that's easy. You don't have to pack lunches. You don't have to, but we live in Charleston. And she was born in June. So it was hot. It was hot in the car. It was hot outside. My boys wanted to be outside doing things, but Ruth was too little to be outside doing things. Like it was just, that was the hardest part about it. And then I decided to potty train my toddler while I was on maternity leave. So that also.
Why not?
Yeah.
Just pile it on.
Just pile it on. So anyway, that was like the hardest part of that postpartum season with number 3.
Yeah, I think that, sitting in the seat as your sister, I think that the evolution of you as a mom obviously you were made into a stronger, like, early mom, if you will, because of your education that you gained while you were going through this. But I think it's always funny for me to see my friends, when you have your first baby and then you have your second and third baby. Like, I think you talked about this maybe on our last episode, the things that you do as a first time mom that you just don't do I don't know if we talked about that, but it's just really funny because the relaxation that sets in, I think from 1 to 3 is just incredible to see. And I think that you had a much more relaxed kind of point of view on Ruth when you brought her home. And I think that with all these other things that you did differently, I think that, and maybe that's why you were more relaxed, is because you did all these things differently. But there was definitely a big difference between baby 1 and baby 3 coming home. Even though you had 2 other kids and, still a newborn baby, it was it was just amazing to see kind of the progress.
Yeah. And I agree. I think just being a seasoned mom, like some of the relaxation just comes from having already done it a couple times before. I agree with that. I think too, a lot of it has to do with like knowledge and having had that knowledge, but it also depends on your personality type. Like sometimes you just have to go through it to really feel confident. You know, you could prepare all day long, but at the end of the day, you're not really going to feel comfortable until you've actually like been through it.
Well, I think even like, you know, being a mom, what I've observed in you is like, you are like the type A, my house has got to be clean. After you have a couple kids, you're like, I don't need to really touch that like you would have.
Well, Luke, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because that is true. You have to figure out what you can let go. Like I used to never leave dishes in the sink overnight. And now sometimes I'm like, I'm not doing that. You know, like I could run myself ragged and fold all this laundry and do all these dishes and all these things. But that is the fastest way to overwhelm for sure. So, but it's funny because I'm always like, yeah, I'm very like, I have to have my house clean and whatever. He stops and he'll correct me. You have to have your house tidy and organized. You don't have to have it clean. Because he's like, and that's true. Like I need it to look clean, but if you actually get out and look, there are some spots that are probably not super clean. It's just everything has a place. Yeah. If you haven't worn it or used it in 6 months, it's going to Goodwill. Like I don't like clutter. Everything is organized, but it's not necessarily super clean for sure.
All right. Well, let's take on baby number 4, which was, I think, such our Clayboy. Luke hates that I call him Clayboy.
Do you want to tell everyone where that nickname came from?
Well, I think I know where it came from. So Hillary came about, I was getting married in October. Hillary delivered Clay in August. Is that right?
July 15th.
July
2022.
Okay, July 15th. So she delivered Clay in July. I was getting married in October. My bridal shower in Arizona was in August.
Yeah.
And we're really bummed out that she couldn't come because it was like at the end of COVID and we didn't want to take the chances. And she had a newborn at home. So we kind of thought maybe she would make it. We decided that she shouldn't. So I show up to pick up my mom and grandmother at the airport for my bridal shower weekend. And my mom got stuck in the bathroom or something. I don't remember what happened, but I was at the baggage carousel trying to get their bags with my grandmother. And Mom and Hillary come walking up, and Hillary has surprised me, and she's brought Clay to Arizona to meet me because I had not been home. And
that was the first time you had met him, right?
My bridal shower. Yes.
Yeah,
so was the first because I didn't come home.
Well, you did come home. You came home the week before I delivered.
Right before.
Because we thought, surely I'm going to deliver at 39 weeks. Again, my mom was out of town on a trip. My mom goes out of town all the time.
I did come home because...
Yeah, and you were waiting for him to come, and we had this whole plan. And then you were really bummed because he didn't come. And you went back to...
He didn't come while I was
there. Yes. Yeah, so this was the first time you were seeing him.
Yeah, so this was the first time that I was seeing him. So... Hillary's like, oh yeah, this is Clay. You know, we hug, I hold them. She's like, all right, here are the ground rules. Like this is what's going to make this trip work. I'm staying in your room with you. You're going to do one of the nighttime feedings. I was like,
he's like 5 weeks old at this point. Feeding is super complicated. He's the worst feeding baby I've ever worked with in the history of my whole clinical experience. We are talking like when he was born, his tongue is tied to the floor of his mouth. He cannot feed from a bottle. He cannot breastfeed. By this point, he is feeding better, but at this point, I was exclusively pumping and he was getting bottle feeds. And so when I was at home, Luke was helping with one of those so that I could get a uninterrupted stretch of sleep at night. All right, I'm passing it back to you, Erica. I just wanted to give some context.
So, no, that gives some good reference because she basically said, like, I'm going to go, but I'm signing up, Erica, for the Luke duties. Like, if I'm going, I'm like, she is now Clay's dad. So for the next couple days. So she got here. I was totally fine with it. Gosh, y'all, losing sleep and having a newborn in your room. Yikes.
And he was actually a really good sleeper at that point. Like he would feed and go right back to sleep. And he was doing a solid 6-hour stretch, I believe, at that point. Like he wasn't a bad sleeper, just for context again.
So while he was here, he was new. And so I, for some reason, came up with the nickname Clayboy Bunny. Like Playboy Bunny.
Exactly. That's where I was leading you. Playboy Bunny.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, so I at some point was on the phone with Luke, Hillary's husband, while he was here. And I said, oh, Clayboy Bunny. And Luke said, don't call him that. And I said, well, I think it's already kind of stuck. So now to this day, Hillary calls him Playboy Bunny. Has Luke caught on yet?
And I only do it in the privacy of just me and Clay, or around you. And when it's me and you and Clay. But I call him Clayboy, but I do not add on the bunny part. So that'll be a funny story.
Yeah.
All right.
Love it.
I just realized.
Anyways,
I'm going to try to speed through this one because I just realized this is a super long podcast. So you guys might not want to keep listening. This pregnancy, so this point, I'm no longer working inpatient as a lactation consultant. I'm sorry, as a labor and delivery nurse. I have left the hospital. I left the hospital in June of 2021. So almost 3 years ago now, and opened my own private practice called Baby Settler, brick and mortar. We help with breastfeeding and baby sleep. But I still know everybody at this hospital. Like they're still my friends. So I'm still delivering in a space that I know everyone, and it's my home. I had my last 2 babies there. So this experience was a little bit differently because I was considered a high-risk pregnancy from 24 to 37 weeks because I was having liver issues. So I was seeing maternal fetal medicine. I have a lot of thoughts about why I had liver issues during this pregnancy. I'm going to let you guys think on the timeline from maybe things that happened between 6 years ago versus 2 years ago pregnancy, if you kind of catch what I'm putting down.
Can I just say it?
I don't know. The algorithm might not like us. Yeah, you can say it. Okay. No, you can say it. Go ahead.
There were schmaxines. It rhymes with schmaxine.
Yes. So anecdotal. I'm not claiming any evidence. I'm not saying that this was causation or anything, but I am looking back and questioning if any of that could.
It was something different that happened.
It was something different. And my other pregnancies, I'd never had any issues. So anyway, the only reason I'm telling you this about MFM is because I had a great maternal fetal medicine doctor. But every time I would go see them, they kept commenting on how big of a baby he was. They kept saying, oh my gosh, he's such a big baby. He's measuring so big. And so in my mind, I was worried about having a big baby, and I had seen shoulder dystocias. If you don't know what that is, that's basically when your baby's head is born and their shoulders get stuck. And it does happen. It's one of those things that as a labor nurse and as an OBGYN or a midwife delivering a baby, those are one of those moments where oh gosh, we know how to manage it, but it's not fun. Nobody wants to deal with a shoulder dystocia. So from in my second and third trimester, I was already worried about this because of the seeds that were planted when I was having these ultrasounds with maternal fetal medicine. I didn't really verbalize that to anyone, but in my mind, I was worried about that. I was also worried about delivering at home or in the car. Our house is 45 minutes from the hospital that we deliver at. And my past births have been so quick. Ruth's was relatively quick, being that she was an induction, but Boyd and Ben, they had always delivered within 15 or 20 minutes of my water breaking. And so in my mind, I was if I go into labor and my water breaks at home, am I going to make it to the hospital? Or are we going to deliver in the car? So those were just 2 big things that I was up against. So there were many times where I thought I was in labor before I was actually in labor with my 4th baby, which is so weird because that usually happens more to first-time moms. But I promise you, there were probably at least 3 times that I told Luke, I think this, and maybe even you too, Erica. Like, I think this is it. Like, I think I'm in labor, but then I would go to sleep and I wasn't in labor. So
yeah, I was so pissed because that whole week,
yeah,
you were teasing me.
yeah, I know. Cause I really thought I was in labor. So I was 40 weeks in one day. So just over my due date. He was due on July 14th and he was born on July 15th. And so July 14th, I went to bed and I can't remember. I think I felt like I was in labor when I went to bed, but again, usually wasn't. And I woke up at like 2 or 3 in the morning and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, these contractions feel stronger. My water hadn't broken, but I was starting to feel anxious about if my water breaks, he's going to be delivered and, you know, it's going to be terrible. And so we called my mom to come over and stay with our kids and got Luke up. Luke went and made himself some coffee. I got a shower real quick and we started the drive into the hospital, and my contractions were pretty regular. I would say like every 5 to 7 minutes driving into the hospital. And then when we got to the hospital, like my OB, who's also a friend of mine, I texted her and she was like at the hospital waiting because she thought I was going to go super fast too. And long story short, I was in labor for 16 hours. So, and I say labor, I got to the hospital. We got to the hospital around 6 a.m. and he delivered at like, I think it was like 8:10 p.m. So that's like 14 hours in the hospital. And then, you know, probably 2 or 3 hours, at home. Yeah, it was like 16 to 17 hours of labor before he was actually born, which was the longest labor of my life.
We talked about this earlier, that there's not 16 hours of footage, but there is a video of Hillary pushing this baby out.
Yes.
That she has that is posted on Instagram.
Yes. It's on my feed. You have to scroll back again.
And there's like some pretty special things about it, because I think that when I, being the non-medical person, like you think of the lady sitting in the bed and like screaming and making those noises that you were talking about earlier, but you did that, like you were freestyling in there. Yeah. You were just like doing whatever felt right. So like, can you talk a little bit about that and what you were actually doing so people understand?
Yeah. So it was weird because it was like I would have strong contractions and then my contractions wouldn't be strong. And so I knew something was up. Like I knew he's either not positioned right or he is really big. He's really big and this is taking so long because he's not going to fit. And it was that voice that I had in my head, like that worry that I had that was planted early on. And so I was doing all the things. I was purposely putting myself in positions that I knew would progress labor. And I did that all day long. I was exhausted. I didn't have any Pitocin. I did not have any medications. I really I wanted to have what's called a physiologic birth, which is just like, no, you know, we're not breaking my water. We're not doing anything to make things progress other than just listening to my body and letting my body labor. So with that, I ended up feeling like, you know what, I need to get in hands and knees position. Like I need to literally get on this bed, get on my hands and knees. I feel like he is not positioned optimally to come out. Like something is up. So I got in that position and I remember Luke was like rubbing my back or just doing something. And he said, I got to go to the bathroom real quick. And so he stepped away from the bed for a second to go into the bathroom that was in the room. And all of a sudden my water broke. And I knew at that point, I was like, this is like definitely getting ready to happen just based on history. So I called out to Luke. I was like, my water broke, and called my nurse friend who was taking care of me. And she comes in the room and they're like trying to, you know, get me to lay on my back and like do all these things. And I'm like not moving at all. I'm just like, no, this is the position that I want to be in. Like, I didn't say that to them. I just wasn't doing what they were telling me to do.
You just ignored them.
And I was having my contractions and I was doing my breathing. And then between my contractions, they'd be like, I heard them call and say, yeah, can we get deliveries set up in here in room, 304? Like, we're getting close to delivery. Then my OB friend comes in and she's like trying to check me while I'm in hands and knees, and I was like, ow, that hurt. And she wanted to make sure that my cervix was completely dilated, because you can get to the point where you're laboring and your cervix is not completely dilated. And if you push through that, then you can actually cause trauma to your cervix and cause swelling, which is not going to help you deliver a baby. So she was looking out for my best interest. And I hadn't been checked. Like, I hadn't let anybody check me all day because I just wanted to have this really no interventions. So we timed it, because I said to Luke, when my water breaks, I want you to set the camera up, because I want to make sure that I don't have any video from any of my other births. Like, this is my last baby. I really want to have a birth video. So he set the camera up, and it was 8 minutes from the time that he set that camera up until the baby was born. So my water broke within a minute or two of that. So less than 10 minutes after my water broke, he was born. But the crazy thing is that he came out what's called face up. So like, babies are supposed to really come out face down, because their necks kind of, think about their chin dropping to their chest. It makes, when they do that chin to the chest position, it kind of rounds their shoulders and makes their shoulder diameter smaller. And it's just it makes their diameter smaller, so it's easier for them to come out. If they come out face up, then it makes their shoulders wider, and it just makes, it's very hard for somebody to push a baby out face up, which is also called OP, or occiput posterior. So most first-time moms with OP babies, a lot of them will end up with a C-section, because it's really hard to deliver in that position. Some babies will turn at the very last minute. They'll spin and they'll come out face down. But Clay came out face first, and he had a shoulder dystocia, which it's just crazy, because, I mean, I didn't manifest that, but it's almost like, maybe I did, I don't know. But he had a shoulder dystocia. But the thing is that being in the hands and knees position, that is a really good position to open up your pelvis and make the widest circumference for them to get out. And I feel like I knew, like, instinctively, like, I have to stay in this position. Like, I need to go to this position, and I have to stay in this position to be able to have him safely. I think I traumatized my OB friend, because, it's always hard, like, taking care of your friends.
I can tell you, I was traumatized.
Yeah. And she,
also.
OBs are trained, like, there's certain maneuvers that you do when you have a shoulder dystocia, and to have a mom be in hands and knees and not on their back, it's hard to, like, orient, and it throws you off. Yeah. But I also just felt really confident in what my body could do. And thankfully my OB knew me, and she trusted me to trust my body. And she, allowed me to deliver in that position. I mean, I think even if she hadn't, I still wouldn't have moved. Like, I still would have stayed in it. But I remember she talked about it multiple times after delivery. And I'm sure if we talked about it again to this day, she's going to be like, yeah, that was a little bit traumatic for me. I'll have to ask her. But anyway, that was really, I know that was a lot, but that basically, I trusted my body, and I also trusted my care team, the people that I was surrounded with. And so everything ended up totally fine. But I do think it's funny that I remember you saying you were traumatized by that birth video.
Well,
is traumatized not the right word?
Like, what? No, it's traumatized. There's trauma.
Yeah,
there's definite trauma. Nate
Which is
knows
not
about
my
it.
intention.
He won't even watch it.
It's not my intention to like traumatize people, but I hate that. I mean, you have to really go searching for it now if you want to find it. So I'm not going to take it down, but
I am sure. Think about this. This was 2 years ago. I was not thinking about having a baby or getting pregnant. So I was like, not even in this world. And I was like, wow, that was a lot. Like, that seems like very painful.
To be clear,
what is Luke doing? Why is he not more antsy about this? Remember there were like comments about him, like, what is Luke doing?
Yeah.
And why was he barefoot or
that
something?
Was a different video where it was showing like things, affirmations used during labor, and Luke's like, his foot is caught in the video and he's like twiddling his toes, and people are ripping him apart. Like, he better
listen. Yeah. He's had 4 babies. He's been there, done that, like he's like got a frequent flyer card at the hospital.
Yeah.
So, no, it wasn't trauma. It's not traumatic in a bad way. Like, I recommend it's very interesting to watch, and especially knowing
it's not overly
the story
graphic.
that you've told
it's a
now.
side view.
No.
It's a side view.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. So I think it's really interesting to watch, especially if you are going to have a baby or interested in that and now have heard this story. I think this gives more context to that video.
Ruth loves watching that video. She asked to watch it over and over again. She loves it. Wow. I think she's going to be, I think she's going to be delivering babies one day.
She's Clay's mother.
Yeah. Yeah. She's
Clay's second mother.
Yeah. She's a little mama.
So, yeah. Well, I know that we're going really, really long here. I know that we're going to get in a future episode into the breastfeeding journey with Clay, because I think that was something that was really a journey for you and unexpected for you. So I think we saved that for another conversation
for sure.
But I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Before we close out. So like your four deliveries, like rate the difficulty now that you've described them all, like 1 being the easiest, 4 being the hardest.
Okay. So baby number 4 was the hardest. If he had been my first unmedicated birth, I think I would question my ability to do it again. Like I have literally said to Luke, if we had a 5th child, I don't know that I could do it again. But the farther out I've gotten from that delivery, I think, oh no, I could do it again. So I think that's how it works with hormones, is like we forget so that we'll do it again. So we'll have more babies. But if I really sit with it, he was the hardest. And then I would say Boyd was the second hardest. So like my very first baby, with all of that came with the epidural and everything. Ben was my...
And not knowing.
Yeah. And then Ruth, just because she was basically an induced delivery. And then Ben was my easiest. He definitely was my easiest. And birth weights. So 4th baby was 8 pounds, 9 ounces. Again, I don't know. It was 4 years between my 3rd and my 4th baby. So I can't remember exactly what it felt like, but I feel like it feels the same no matter how big your baby is. Ruth was 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Ben was 7'15" and Boyd was 6'6". So I kind of had like varying so I had 32 babies born at 39 and 5. Ruth was born at 38 and 3 with her induction. And then Clay was 40 and 1.
What would you say, like, not necessarily don't choose a child that like is the most magical moment of your life, but like thinking back on delivering your 4 babies, like of those experiences, like what would you say is the most magical, like the redeeming moment of a delivery for you in your experience?
Oh, it's right after delivery. So like that moment right after delivery, it's just indescribable. Like I can't even describe it. And that's why I tell all parents that I work with in private practice is protect that first hour or 2 after delivery. Like do not, unless you have people that you want with you during delivery, do not let your friends and families come in those first 2 hours, because they are so special and it's time that you can never get back. You just can't ever. Mm-hmm. As far as like thinking back to my 4 kids, we didn't know what Clay was going to be. He was our only surprise baby. We knew the genders of the first 3, but not the 4th one. And so I think that was highly recommend that. Highly. And that's going against the grain for me because I'm a planner, but there's not many surprises in life. There's just not. And that was such a really sweet surprise to just have your baby and then also learn the gender right at delivery. It was so special.
All right, Hill. Well, we got to let these ladies get back to mommy.
Yes,
so I think
sure.
we got a couple housekeeping items to wrap up.
Yes. So on our next episode, we are going to talk about combo feeding and the many, many nuances to feeding. But again, before we go, I'm going to ask you that favor again. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and you're excited about what we'll be talking about next week, please text your best friend this episode and tell her to give us a listen. And if you have time, I want you to go leave us a review. Let us know what you liked. Let us know what you want to hear. Remember, we are newbies to podcasting, and our purpose here is to serve you. We want to talk about the things that you want us to talk about, and your reviews will make our podcast more findable for other moms to be able to join in on these candid conversations. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Early Momming Podcast. Before you go, can I ask you a favor? If you enjoyed listening to this podcast and you're excited about what we'll be talking about in the future, please text your best friend this episode and tell her to give us a listen. And if you have time, do you mind going to leave us a review? Let us know what you liked. We are here to serve you. Plus, your reviews will make our podcast more findable for other moms to be able to join in on these candid conversations. Shout out to our sound guy, Kyle Moore, who makes it way easier to listen to us. And if you need to get in touch with us, send us an email at podcast@babysettler.com or send us a DM at Early Momming Podcast on Instagram. All right, we'll see you next time.